My name is Lisa Martinez, and I am an associate professor of sociology at the University of Denver, where I study social inequality, race and politics, and immigration. In recent years, my work has examined the educational, occupational, and political experiences of undocumented and immigrant youth. These young people are often referred to as the 1.5 generation because they migrated to the US as children and have spent their formative lives in the United States. I first became interested in the topic of undocumented youth activism in 2006 when, as a new faculty member, I was searching for my next research project. In a lot of ways, the project found me because I was teaching a course called Latinos in American Society. And it was there where I first became attuned to many of the issues facing undocumented students and immigrant communities. Some of the students in that class were very involved in the immigrant rights movement, and they had invited me to attend a march that was taking place in downtown Denver on May 1st, 2006. That was the day that would later become known as the May Day marches, or the Day Without Immigrants March. In a lot of ways, that spring was pivotal in terms of the immigrant rights movement, as people across the country, both immigrants and non-immigrants, marched through the streets of American cities, including right here in downtown Denver. They were gathering together to voice disappointment at the failure to pass the DREAM Act, which would have provided a path to citizenship for undocumented youth who met certain eligibility criteria. They were also protesting in opposition to the advent of what became known as Show Me Your Papers laws, which essentially gave law enforcement the authority to stop persons suspected of being in the country without documents. So the opposition was not just in terms of their own status, but also in thinking about many of their family members and community members who were also going to be affected. Although comprehensive immigration reform didn't come about as a result of the marches, one consequence was that young people became very involved in activism across the country, and of course here in Colorado. They became, in many respects, sort of the agents of change and the face of the immigrant rights movement, using their networks, using social media, using their connections to others as a means to really sort of bring light to the plight of undocumented communities throughout the country. One sort of development that was particularly important came about in 2012 when President Obama signed the executive order known as Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. DACA provided new opportunities for these young people in terms of giving them work authorization and also providing relief from deportation. For many of the youth activists, this wasn't enough, however, as many of their family members and communities were still threatened by not only Show Me Your Papers laws, but also increasing the criminalization of immigrants and also their detention and deportation. Because these young people are not US citizens, they do not have access to the right to vote. And so for this reason, many of them started turning to these extra institutional measures, including protests, hunger strikes, demonstrations, and others became active in the movement by engaging in storytelling or counter narratives as a way to get their story across to communities. They became a quite powerful force and continue to be a powerful force in voicing opposition to what they consider to be draconian laws that are disproportionately affecting immigrant communities across the country. Of course, now with the rescission of DACA, these young people also face increasing threats in terms of their own status. And it's uncertain what the Trump administration will do ultimately with the DACA program, whether it'll be eliminated altogether or if there will be some alternative offered so that these young people can continue to receive relief. To this question of how is it that young people can become involved in activism, the answer is that there are many ways. I would encourage everyone to think about ways in which you might help bring about some change, whether it's by starting a campaign in your schools, as many of the activists, in fact, use their connections, they use their education and their skills in both high schools and institutions of higher education as a means to bring many of these issues to light. So a student organization is a really great way to get started. Another way to become an activist or become involved engaged in activism is to learn more about an issue. think about the issues that are affecting your local community and the ways in which you might get involved, whether it is through student organizations or maybe nonprofit organizations. It's not difficult to find many of the organizations that are doing this kind of work, which usually play a very pivotal role in terms of mobilizing for action. You might volunteer at one of these organizations to maybe reach out to members. Maybe you can become involved in a political campaign so that even if you're not necessarily marching in demonstrations, there are certainly ways in which you can get involved by using influence and working within the offices of elected officials. Another idea or possibility is to reach out to community groups and maybe host a Know Your Rights campaign. This is one way to perhaps serve as an ally to immigrant communities or others who are marginalized and might be experiencing some potential threat, whether it be legislation, maybe it's a particularly harsh political climate, but that's one way in which young people can become engaged in activism and more sort of protest-oriented politics. Another way would be to write letters to your political officials, hold them accountable, ask them what their stances are on the policies that might affect these communities, and see if there's a way in which you can engage with them and with community groups and organizations. There's a multitude of ways, and it usually, for many of the type of activism that young people engage in, doesn't require any special training or skills, as many of them are more than willing to provide training for individuals who are interested. So some small steps could be everything from learning more about an issue and how it's affecting communities. One would be to listen to what's going on to members of your community. And then, of course, another would be to lead. Think about starting a campus organization, whether it be in your high school or on your college campus, and think of how these might be used as vehicles to engaging in more student-oriented activism. I think the latter are particularly powerful tools, since we know from a lot of the literature and social movements that campuses are, in many respects, hotbeds of political activism. And if we look to examples from the 1960s, for example, there are certainly many ways in which young people have gathered together for purposes of bringing about and affecting change.